Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! So, some background. I live in a 3-story apartment building with my mom and my little brother. We are not really that well off, so it's all we can afford. We have had problems with these neighbors for about 5 months now. The rest of the building has given them nicknames, so that's how I refer to them. The Old Crow and Dummy D. Dummy D is Old Crow's son. They live in the bottom apartments of the complex. Dummy D has stacks of charges under his belt. From threats of assault to saying he was going to hurt and do horrid things to one of my neighbors. He screams for no reason, scares the children of the complex, and he has also avoided paying rent for over 7-ish months, and none of us know how. I have many stories from them, but this one finally broke me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. It's a bit of a long read, so buckle up. So it was a pretty normal day. I had just got out from school and I had to take some trash out. My cat wanted to go out too, Kiki. He's a good boy and never normally runs off, and he comes inside when told. He's like a dog. So I bring out the trash with Kiki and let him stay out for a bit longer, just sniffing some cobwebs and other cat things. So having nothing to do, I tread around in the fresher snow, leaving some footprints. Now this patch of snow is around 5 feet away from the Old Crow's window. I have no intention of making her squawk, so I keep my head down and crunch some snow. Kiki finishes sniffing and walks back inside with me close behind. As soon as I walked in the building, I heard the Old Crow yelling about something. I couldn't quite make it out, all but my mom's name. Putting 2 and 2 together, I assume she's pissed I was even in the breathing room of her window. So I let my cat in my apartment and went over to my next door neighbors, where my mom and the lady who lived there were talking. I told them that the crow was upset and we all just kinda laughed it off. Nothing much she would do, or so we assumed. After a bit of chat, we heard a loud bang. It sounded like gunshots coming from out back. My mom told me to go look out my window to see what it was, and I did, and I could see absolutely nothing. So I decided to swallow my fear and go out to see what it was myself. I turned on my phone camera and headed out back. My heart races now thinking about it. It was scary. I make it out back to get a recording of the blast of a firecracker. Before I can think, everyone out back is screaming. The Old Crow is yelling, screaming and calling me names, and so is Dummy D, who is still setting off firecrackers. Now, I am never someone to lose my temper, but after months and months of keeping my mouth shut, letting everyone fear these people, letting kids cry not wanting to leave their apartments, I let loose, screaming at them, telling them that they should be adults. It was a screaming match. I can still feel the ringing in my ears. My voice still hurt. My mom heard the yelling and came down. So now it was a 4-way scream-off between a high schooler, his mom, an old batty woman, and her violent son. Firecrackers are still going off in the background. Finally, the cops were called, and my mom dragged me upstairs. I stopped the recording. It was like 7 minutes long. I ended up calling a friend and just breaking down. My anxiety was high and my brain was in shambles. I needed to let loose the fear I swallowed. After the quick call, the cops appear, asking for information about the situation. I tell them and show the video. I can still hear Dummy D screaming, get an officer, and Old Crow crying crocodile tears, trying to convince the officers that they were victims. It still pisses me off. The cop walks away to converse with other officers, all who have been here before. They know about Dummy D and the Crow. After what feels like ages, the cop comes back and states that possession of firecrackers is illegal with no signed permission. Dummy had no permission, so the cops take him and leave. And me, my mom, and my other neighbor just stand in the hall, not understanding how all this happened. After all this, after all these months, the pain, the PTSD, the everything, it was a really terrible experience. So this is a crazy story that goes over many years. So some details such as dates may be brushed over because I don't exactly remember. But overall, this is a story either through my own eyes or what my mom has told me. I thought it needed to be posted somewhere, and what better place than here. Chapter 1: The Beginning. So it was 2012 when my stepbrother married this chick. Let me tell you, she was the most entitled person ever. My brother wasn't rich or even a nice guy, but she somehow decided he was perfect for her. I always didn't like this chick because she was always going around and thinking she was better than everyone and just overall being snobby. I was outcast from the family because of it since she was supposedly a good person. I saw through her nonsense and always made it known. Anyways, they got married and have a kid, obviously my niece. They get this big house and everything. Ever since my niece was born, we had her every weekend. And if my mom had plans, then we were expected to work around their schedule to get her or figure it out. We thought this was weird because most mothers would want to have their babies around them. My mom wouldn't let me out of her sight until I was 2. But the first house she came home to was ours. We shrugged it off and just loved continuing to have her. The sister-in-law also had a son from a previous marriage. We would sometimes get him too, but he was out of control. I believe he has some sort of ADD and psychopathic tendency. I would try to teach him that animals needed to be treated with respect, and he always made sure to help me with my own whenever he was over. I had a hamster and a cat, but his own dog was abused regularly by him despite mine and my mom's guidance. He also tried to commit suicide during 2nd grade because he was tired of his mom punishing him for stuff most children would get in trouble for. We figured this was just him and encouraged his mom to get him help, but she refused and said he was normal and he's just a boy. When my niece started acting the same way, we both knew it was just bad parenting. We tried everything we could to give them at least stability on the weekend. They were always going from house to house because relatives wanted to see them, but it wasn't enough in the end, sadly. Chapter 2: The Divorce. So my brother's terrible personality finally sent her over the edge. She was tired of living paycheck to paycheck and thought she deserved to not work or at least have a stay-at-home job. So because the house deed was only in her name, she ended up getting the house. After many debates, she ended up getting full custody and all the items in the house as well. My brother had to live on our couch because of this. During the divorce process, my brother worked as a corrections officer in a prison. And guess who decides to date an inmate? Yep, sister-in-law. Apparently this inmate was a friend of the family and ran some kind of mafia gang. Well, because the divorce wasn't final, my brother lost his job because it was a conflict of interest and he hadn't made it out of the probation period. It literally broke his heart to lose his dream job he finally found. So here we are, my brother living back at home with us, jobless, nowhere to go, and we still were getting my niece every weekend or more. We found out that she was taking my niece and her son to see this guy in prison because they have a right to have a father figure. Of course, we were outraged, but there was nothing we could do. Fast forward and sister-in-law dumps the leader of the gang and decides to date one of his lackeys instead because, well, he was actually out of prison. We will call him Carl for the sake of the story. Chapter 3: The House. So eventually my brother gets his crap together and finds a new chick to bum off of. She lives like 3 states away, so he decides to go live there, away from my niece, his child. He still has partial custody over my niece at this point, so he low-key abandoned her here with us whenever it was her week to be with him. He told us he would just come up every week to spend time with her or whatever, but he literally only did this a handful of times. This poor kid never had a chance, honestly. So my mom ends up being the middleman between these people, and all she really just wants to do is just be there for my niece. So fast forward, then sister-in-law tells us that they are moving because they can't afford the house they were living in, but it's okay cause Carl found a house for sale and they were buying that one for really cheap. My mom looked into the house and couldn't figure out how they were getting it for half the price of what the listing said it was for, but she just shrugged it off because sister-in-law could be very manipulative and she did know more about mortgages and stuff than my mom because, well, she worked at a bank. So they move and we think it's okay. And boy, were we wrong. My mom visited this house and there was literal feces all over the house. She told me the smell was awful and told me that it looked like it had been through many squatters. She told me that all the doors were locked from the outside and that there was a bed in the attic with someone's name written above it. She also said that none of the electric/plumbing worked either. So literally this house was not suited for anyone, let alone children, who were about 8 and 6 at the time. She told my brother and he basically said there was nothing he could do. So she thinks there is nothing she could do either. It also didn't help that sister-in-law couldn't keep her story straight. She told my mom that the house was a part of Carl's family and they inherited it, making us feel like this was sketchy. My mom would pick my niece up from this house every weekend. I would get little glimpses of what was actually happening through her conversations with her. Apparently, they didn't have electricity or water because they didn't have proof of residency. My mom asked sister-in-law why they can't show the deed, and she told her that they didn't know where it was and made all these excuses on why they couldn't show proof. So they were using a propane tank to warm the house, and Carl would rig the electric on at night so that they could have it illegally. We didn't know this though at the time. They also just let my niece run around the town, which put her in many scary situations, she said. Like men watching her and getting asked a lot of questions from people. Take note, she's about 6 at the time. There is more, but I will keep it at that to save time. So Carl gets pulled over one day and the cops run his license. He apparently had a warrant out for his arrest, so Carl makes a break for it since he was only a couple blocks away from the house. The cops obviously follow and knock on the door, and apparently sister-in-law opens the door after telling Carl to run out the back, and that she would hold him off. He tackles a cop and obviously this plan didn't work because at this point, the officers already had backup and both were arrested. The neighbor picked their kids up from the bus and pleaded that they will be able to get some of the kids' items from the house so that way they could be taken care of. The officers allowed it and phone calls were made for my mom to pick up both kids. She eventually got in contact with the son's dad and he picked them up later that day. So this is where everything comes to light when the officers did a little digging. Apparently Carl and sister-in-law have been going into people's barns and taking and selling whatever was there. They tried to say that it was all abandoned and that they had a right to take it. When money ran out, they started squatting at this house. Well, apparently sister-in-law had gotten a friend at work to notarize the documents so that way they could get the deed transferred in their name and the house could actually be theirs. This almost worked if it hadn't been for the fact that this house was being fought over by the family that actually owned it. A grandma or someone died and so the family was fighting over who got the house. In total, there were like 12 charges counted against them in like 3 different counties. So yeah, in the end, Carl got sentenced to 20 years and sister-in-law was sentenced 12, even though this was her first offense against the law. It was because she badmouthed the court. The crazy thing is, to this day she still believes the house is hers, and that when she gets out she will fight and get it back because it is rightfully hers. This morning I got into my car and realized that I left my headlights on. Thankfully, modern technology meant it had automatically switched off when the key was removed, but it reminded me of a time where that wasn't so. Many years ago, I was working one of my first jobs in a little cafe, nearing the end of my training period. It was a quiet day, perfect to put the newbie on with only one experienced staff member. The experienced staff member called in sick. Boss had to come in and cover until Sue could come in early. Boss wanted to use the time on site to do paperwork out the back. I'll be in here if you have any questions, he says. I very annoyingly had a lot of questions. How to avoid an incorrect transaction, where to find more special paper for the credit card machine, what to do when the coffee grinder stopped working. And finally the boss said, I am busy, don't bother me unless it's an emergency. Let me know when Sue is here. Shyly, I replied, that's what I came to tell you. Sue just arrived. Great! For any more questions, ask her. Sue took over the coffee area and got me on restocking, clearing tables, and emptying the bins and other necessary grunt work. I went out to the outside bins through the little staff parking area and saw my boss's old car there with the headlights still on. I went back to my boss's office. Boss, is it an emergency? Boss snapped. No, not to me, I replied. Then go away. I left quickly and I went to tell Sue instead. Sue. Then I changed my mind. Boss doesn't want to be disturbed unless it's an emergency, so I'm supposed to ask you if I have more questions. Sue and I worked pleasantly until the end of my shift a few hours later. As I gathered my things to leave, Boss ran by me, knocking into me a bit, without turning around to see if I was okay. He said, Sorry, I'm in a rush. I slowed down to see what happened next. Getting out my prick of a phone to text my mother I was on my way home. I could hear my boss swearing. Obi! Oh no. Boss realized that was what I was going to tell them earlier. I was in trouble. Can you bring your car in and give me a jump start? My battery is flat. Only a few cars could fit, so only senior staff and management could park there. I tell him, I walked here. I live 10 minutes walk up the hill. I raced off before my boss could blame me. The next time I was on shift with Sue, I asked what happened to Boss. Headlights left on. Got a flat battery. Boss tried to jump start it with my car, but it didn't work. Had to call a taxi. Funny that neither of us noticed the lights were on when we walked by it. And I realized, of course, she had to have seen it when she walked in. I can only imagine why she didn't say anything either. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.